Since changing the name of the Eclectic Americana Friday morning drive time radio show on January 20th, 1989 to the Bushwhackers Breakfast Club, the DJs in the collective have strived to entertain and inform our listeners. Airing from 6 to 9 a.m. Pacific at KZSC 88.1 FM in Santa Cruz, California, the Bushwhackers usually have 2 interviews a week, each airing for about half an hour. We're not afraid to ask questions or admit that we don't know something, and we don't mind taking deep dives or following a tangent as we get into how sausage is made in local, county, or state politics, or learning about things going on in our community, or discussions with artists. Our interviews are not scripted and are produced by myself, Dangerous Dan Orange. Good morning, KZSC. You're on the air.
Good morning.
Mayor Fred Keeley, the first directly elected mayor of Santa Cruz, but not your first rodeo.
No, not hardly. No, I've been in a couple of rodeos so far.
Tell us a little bit about your background in politics in Santa Cruz. But first, what brought you to Santa Cruz and when did you get here?
I got to Santa Cruz in 1977 after graduating from San Jose State. And I grew up in San Jose. My parents brought us here a lot to go to the boardwalk because it was inexpensive, and fell in love with Santa Cruz. And as soon as I could get over here myself, I got here.
And what did you have gainful employment, or did you win the lottery?
Neither. I had gainful employment. And then in 1980, a friend of mine ran for the Board of Supervisors, and when he won, he asked me to be his staff, and then a member of the legislature asked me to be his chief of staff, and then I ran for the Board of Supervisors and got elected to a couple of terms, and 10 years as the elected county treasurer of Santa Cruz, and then several terms in the California State Assembly representing the Central Coast. And then I kind of took a few years off. I didn't think I was ever going to run for anything again. I was teaching at San Jose State and serving on nonprofit boards, and life was wonderful. And then the voters changed the charter, and some folks talked me into running for mayor. So that's kind of how I got here.
Gotcha. So, if I remember, if I'm not mistaken, if you're a county supervisor, your annual salary is actually something that's, approximating livable in Santa Cruz County, which is, I believe, about $150,000 a year. But if you're on the city council, if you add up all the hours you work and you divide it into how much you're getting paid, it's barely minimum wage, or $15 an hour, which is minimum wage in Santa Cruz. What is the salary for the mayor?
The mayor gets exactly twice as much as council members make. Council members make about $20,000 before taxes, and the mayor makes about $40,000 before taxes. So I don't think too many people go into it for the money, and I think it's a problem. I think it's a real problem. Not for me. I'm an old geezer, and saved a couple of pennies here and there. Things are fine. I don't have any trouble. But can you imagine if you're somebody working hard, you got a family, you got a real job, and you run for city council, and like you say, you're spending lots and lots of time on it. You can't do it as somebody who, I'm going to do it for the money. So it takes a lot of people out of play who certainly aren't going to live on $20,000 a year before taxes. So it becomes something that only people with certain kinds of means can make this happen and run for city council successfully. But I will say this, I think that the new districting setup has cut the cost of running for city council probably by 2/3 or more, and but that still leaves you with, what do I do for actually making a living once you're a council member? So,
well, Mayor,
I think over time, good idea to notch up the city council's salary. And some people say, they're all politicians, and we'll give them more money, it just encourages them. But I think that's a pretty cynical point of view. Again, I don't need money. It's not about me. It's about who can even think about running for these offices when the resources for you are so little.
Well, Fred, if prior to having a directly elected mayor, the tradition was that the top vote getter of each 2-year election would become vice mayor and then mayor the next year. Since it would seem really self-serving for the city council to vote themselves a raise, now that you're the mayor, could you bring it forward to give them a raise so that it's slightly more than starvation wages? $20K a year for the amount of time that a city council member puts in seems just ridiculously low. Could you bring that forward?
Yes, and I've had conversations with people during the campaign. People would ask me about a similar kind of question to what you're asking. And I'm not going to pretend this was 90% of the people asking about this, but I got a lot of it actually up on campus. How would a student make this work? I got it in various places. But here's you don't have to amend the charter or anything to do it. It's a budget decision. And it may make sense to notch it up just a little bit at a time over 3 or 4 years. See how it works. Don't make it a big hit on the city general fund all at once. But rather than the mechanism of how do you do it, I've been in government a long time, can do it. It's a matter of how much would it be and what do you get out of it? Why would we be doing this? And my sense is you do it because it expands what I call the circle of participation. Who is able to be in our representatives in these new districted environments? So I think it's possible, and I think it's a good idea. I've talked to the city manager. I've talked to some of my colleagues. I've talked to voters about it. It's not my number one issue, but it's in my top 10.
Gotcha. Well, let's pivot, Mayor Fred Keeley, to housing and development. We had Lee Butler on Bushwhackers back in November, and there are all these documents that I have been poring over that I got from the city webpage, thanks to Sarah Noose, Santa Cruz senior planner. She started out by...
Actually, she pronounces it noisy.
Okay.
Sarah Noisy. She's wonderful.
Well, thank you, because when Bruce McPherson never corrected me when I was calling him McPherson until B-Movie Bratton said, it's McPherson, Dan. And next time I had Bruce on, it's like, Bruce, you got to correct me, okay? So he says there's no fear in McPherson, right? McPherson, right. So Sarah Noisy started me out by pointing me toward Housing 101. So let's start with that, about what objective design standards are and what they mean for Santa Cruz and all the building and development that's going on.
Well, there's a couple of things going on in your question, so I'll unpack them real quick. The state of California a few years ago started reaching into local governments at the city and county level and reducing the discretionary ability of cities and counties to say no to housing, largely. And in that process, they said one of the barriers they saw to housing that cities and counties have used over time is this issue of subjective design standards. And the state said that in too many cases, that's just a set of excuses for not letting something happen by loving a project to death. So they said you can have objective standards, but you can't have subjective standards. And they're pretty tight on what that definition is. So that's an attempt by the state to increase the chances that housing can be developed in any given community. The second thing the state has done is says, and we are going to tell you what number you are trying to hit in terms of building new housing. And through those two mechanisms, there are several others, the state believes that's going to spur a lot more housing development. And so that's why you're seeing in Santa Cruz, where do you do that? Because the city has been given a number of 4,000 new housing units required by the state to be built in the city of Santa Cruz over the next 8 years. The question is, where's that going to happen and under what conditions? And my thought is this, and the city council is there unanimously, and when I talk to voters, they are there. And that is, if we have to do this, and there's, I think, been a change in the electorate. I think most voters want to see more housing opportunities, but if we're going to do that, let's do it where smart cities do it. You grow up, both literally and figuratively, in your urban core so that you have a light touch on neighborhoods throughout the city. And I'll just add one other piece. We now have districts, and we're going to complete that process next year in the 2024 election, where all city council members will represent a district, and then the mayor's the one elected official citywide. What that's going to do is elect people who are going to say, I really like the idea of building a whole bunch of this housing downtown, because they're not going to run saying, give me 3,000 units I have to build in my district. They're not going to say that. They're going to be very excited about focusing most of it downtown, which has the added benefit of that's what smart cities do anyway. But the political imperative is going to be there to do that.
But, okay, Fred, we're unpacking a bunch of stuff, which we love doing deep dives, how sausage is made.
Yep.
And so what you just touched on is the what's called the RHNA, the RHNA, which is the Regional Housing Needs Allocation. And that's where the state tells the region how many units to build. And in the region, in our region, the Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments, AMBAG, allocates what the state, it divvies up the state number for the big area and allocates some to Scotts Valley, some to Capitola, and a bunch to Santa Cruz. But is this a goal or is this a mandate? What happens if we don't meet that goal, Fred?
That is such a spot-on question. So the state has been doing this for decades, where they aggregate all these numbers at the Department of Finance, and then they disaggregate them to regions, and the regions disaggregate them to cities and counties, exactly the way you described it. If you didn't hit your number back in the day, which is to say up until last year, you became ineligible for a certain colored dollars from the state called Community Development Block Grant money. Some cities and counties looked at that and said, the amount of money we get from the state for hitting our target is not worth what it does to our community. That was a prevailing view. So not a prevailing view. That was oftentimes the response of local governments. In other words, keep your money and keep your rules. We'll be glad to do things our way. Now, that has completely changed. Now it's no longer about the Benjamins. It's not about whether or not you get money from the state. It's all about, if you don't do it, the state will take away your planning authority and they will approve it.
Okay.
That's not an inconsequential change in the law. That's a profound shift in power with regard to who's in charge of local land use planning.
Right. So in the previous 8-year cycle, 2015 to 2023, Santa Cruz built a grand total of 747 new units. And the goal for this cycle is 3,736, almost 4,000. It is a huge increase. And when you look at the scale of the development, it's, we're going to come back later and hit the impact on roads, traffic, etc. But before we do, Eric sends in a quick question. Does housing built on UCSC count toward our Santa Cruz's RHNA?
No.
I love a simple answer. No hemming, no hawing, no qualifiers. It's a no. Okay, so 3,000, 3,700 units. There was a plan it was called the City Council Preferred Plan, and it was coming forward to a City Council meeting, which I believe was the first meeting after you were elected. And this was the plan that included 20-story buildings downtown, and you put the pause on it. What happened there were 20-story buildings south of Laurel. You put a pause on it. Where is it now, and what's going on? This is the south of Laurel, the downtown expansion project.
So during the campaign, I, like any candidate, I'm not special in that regard. Walk a lot of precincts, knock on doors, talk to people, go to house parties, go to backyard barbecues, whatever, anything and everything to be able to meet voters. And I would say to them, because I do have a bit of a profile here, I didn't feel like I needed to spend a lot of time talking about myself. So I'd knock on the door and I'd say, "Hi, I'm Fred Keeley, love to be your mayor. What's on your mind?" Shift it to the voter. The voters, 90+% of the households and people that I talked to, first two things out of the mouth were affordable housing and homelessness. I want you to work on those. Then the third was more of a question where people would go, "What the hell are they thinking about downtown?" And those were code words for 20-story buildings. I mean, people were just incredulous about it. And so I said, 3 weeks before the election, I put out a proposed draft agenda item, and I said, if I'm elected on the first meeting, the first night, I will carry this item, this exact item. So instead of 15, 17, 20-story buildings, no building taller than 12 stories. Number two, 16 to 1,800 housing units within that. Third, and this is really important to a lot of people, 20% of that total needs to be affordable. There's something called density bonuses. If you're a developer and you're willing to do a certain amount of affordable housing, you get to then build more market rate housing too, to give you an incentive to build the affordable housing. Well, that almost inevitably results in 20% affordable housing becoming 13% affordable housing after density bonuses. So the third element was 20% of everything that's built in the new downtown needs to be affordable. So we've totally flipped the script on that. But here's the exciting part from my point of view. That was a unanimous vote. This is probably the single most important development in the city of Santa Cruz since the university arrived, is what to do in that area south of Laurel. Wow. It's going to be the most dense and significant development in 40 or 50 years in Santa Cruz. So my thought was, get it right. Get it done Santa Cruz way. We'll comply with the state, but we're going to do it our way. We don't need to have 17 and 20-story buildings to do it.
Well, how do you do it? If you want 3,600 units down there, and you're not going to go up, you're not going down, that's for sure.
Well, wait a second. Wait.
Or did I get the number wrong? It's 1,700 units. It's 3,600 for the city.
No. I'm amused by your characterization of if we're not going up. 12-story building's a big damn building.
Oh, I see. So instead of having a bunch of 4-story buildings and a couple of 20-story buildings, what you're saying is let's have 12-story as the maximum, but we're going to have more of those.
Exactly. And not uniformly every building's 12 stories. It doesn't need to be. But I wanted to, and the city council wanted to, and the voters wanted to cap what we're managing towards in terms of the height. There's a huge market out there, especially people in their 20s and 30s, early 40s, who want to live in more dense urban areas, more nightlife, more walkable communities, and so on. This is going on all over the country, frankly, all over the world. There's a lot of course, everybody's younger than me, but what I would call younger people they really love. I'm not talking about everybody. I'm talking about a very big market share. Aren't managing their life towards a single-family residential home. they are a very significant cohort of the folks in their 20s, 30s, mid-40s are looking for a different kind of way to enter the housing market. The other thing is I love, you go to exciting cities, they mix. They have mixes. They have mix of incomes, mix of commercial and retail, mixes of public open spaces. If you can hear excitement in my voice, that is what it is.
Okay.
I think we do it a Santa Cruz way. We're going to be so proud of ourselves a few years. Yes, it's change, and that's the hardest thing we do as human beings. But if we're committed to the change and the right kind of change, which I think increasing our housing stock is a part of that, I have great faith in Santa Cruz to do it in a way that is really remarkably good and attractive.
Well, Mayor Fred Keeley, Eric he's like a dog with a bone. He's on this UCSC thing, and he's asking you to elaborate on why UCSC housing doesn't count toward our arena, because Campus Housing West would add 2,200 additional beds all within the city, and UCSC students register and vote for the city council and the mayor. How do you square that with I know the excitement in your voice about going up and building up this south of Laurel area?
Well, the University of California, we don't get credit for whatever they do. First of all, I love the University of California. I'm a San Jose State graduate, so I probably feel, moderately inadequate. But the University of California is just an extraordinary institution, and for all of the this and that we grumble about with regard to the university is to be in a host community of the University of California is a great privilege, but with it come great challenges. And through no fault of this particular chancellor, and frankly, as no fault of chancellors overall, because they have almost nothing to say about building housing on their campuses. That belongs to the office of the president and the regents of the University of California. They have done a poor job of keeping up with enrollment versus housing. Now, this chancellor right now is in full support of a couple of very good-sized projects on campus to house students in various situations, and I welcome that. In fact, Chancellor and I had a sit-down meeting in my office in City Hall yesterday about this, that the university does want to do this. The problem for the university in building housing is that it's not viewed as an academic exercise correctly. It's a business proposition at the university. It's a business model. But my issue is this: every unit they build on campus is helpful to us because it is a pressure release valve on the rental market in town. And so I am very much in favor. I said it during the campaign. I'd say it every chance I get. I am very much in favor of the University of California building a heck of a lot more housing on campus.
Gotcha. Okay, Mayor Fred Keeley, let's pivot to the rest of the building that's going on in Santa Cruz. We're mandated for, 3,700 units. We got 1,700 of them are going to be south of Laurel. I'm looking at the Objective Development Standards and Zoning update from last fall, and I see a bunch of 4-story buildings on Mission, over by Bay and Laurel, on Water Street, on Ocean, and on Branch of 40 and Morrissey. Where is this in the process? And are we worried about 20-story buildings here? Are these going to be, again, 12 stories capped? Is this everything 4 stories? Because there are another 2,000 units that somehow got to get squeezed into Santa Cruz. So we've got about 3 minutes left. Let's talk about the rest of those.
So the number that we were talking about, the 16 to 1,800, is south of Laurel. You're exactly right. I was a social science major, so that means I can't do arithmetic. So let's just call it 4,000, and we're going to do 2,000 down there. We got a couple of thousand left, divided by 5 city council districts over 8 years. So that is the way to keep the lightest touch possible on neighborhoods in terms of meeting the state's requirements on housing. Now, having said all that, it depends in terms of what is going to be built. So you end up with 2 quick examples. 831 Water Street, just up the street from where I live, that is a project under what's called Senate Bill 35, and the developer is proposing very, very high levels of affordable housing in the project. Because of that, the state has said you get a whole bunch of breaks for doing that. That's not going to be 12 stories, nothing close to that. But it is going to stick out because it's right at Branson 40 and Water Street. So it's going to stick out. It's not going to be what everybody thinks is a lot of people are going to object to it, I suspect. The city has nothing to say about it. Not a word. The state law has changed, and that's going to be built. Now, there's other developments that you referenced, proposed developments along Ocean Street and along Front Street, along River Street, not in the south of Laurel, but north of that. Those are also going in part in compliance with, or as an attempt to comply with, state law. You are going to see, there are going to be changes in Santa Cruz that are quite significant. Mm-hmm. The more we can concentrate those in our urban core, I think the better the outcome is going to be. But people should understand, and I think they do, they talk to me about it all the time, that we are not in the same world we were in as recently as 3 years ago. The state has, for 150 years, the state was a home rule state, which means that the local government was in charge of land use. Now, that had an uneven outcome. Some cities, like Santa Cruz, didn't want to build much at all. And because of that, the state said, well, with tremendous housing shortage, it puts unrealistic pressures on the market, upward prices, both in rental and home ownership, and we're going to try to work our way out of that. Now, from an economic point of view, I think it's a fool's errand to think that you can build enough housing units that the market will bend the price curve downward. I think that's a fool's errand. It's not going to happen. You'd have to build, 25,000 housing units in the city of Santa Cruz to get that to happen, and nobody's going to do that.
Mayor Fred Keeley, we're gonna have to hit pause. We have the KPFA Morning News coming up here. The headlines in just a couple of minutes. It's KZSE Santa Cruz, Bushwhackers Breakfast Club. I'm Dangerous Dan.
I'm Calamity Kyle.
And Mayor Fred Keeley, I feel like we have just scratched the surface. We're going to get you back here regularly. I don't know if it's going to be every month or every other month, but you have helped us unpack a lot of this, but we have got to move on. So I'm sorry to cut you off.
My friends, thank you very much. I'd be honored to come back anytime. Have a good day.
Thank you, Fred Keeley.
Thank you, Fred.
You've been listening to a podcast from an interview on the Bushwhackers Breakfast Club on KZSC 88.1 FM in Santa Cruz, California. This interview has been produced by myself, Dangerous Dan Orange. Groovy Gabe Orange helped get this interview into podcast format. KZSC is a student-run college and community non-commercial educational radio station broadcasting from the UC Santa Cruz campus. You can stream KZSC online at kzsc.org. Thanks for listening.